I want to thank him for being here. He's so incredibly busy. I'm surprised. We were just talking how he's not allowed to work the government, but yet he's doing all this work by lecturing this morning and meeting with his residents on the phone at 12:30, and all this volunteer work that he does, and who has time to climb mountains even. But he really does a lot for the community and for his profession. He donates much of his resources to others, and he's now going to donate some time to us. I will now stop talking. Bruce, take it away. Thank you so much for being with us.
Hey, Rabbi. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. And for everybody else today, we've got 23 people on this presentation, and I'm just thrilled. And I see some of my friends on here, and I'm thrilled to have them on as well as the congregants. So, you know, we're living in a different time right now, and you're about to escape from the confines of your house and take a trip around the world with me for the next hour and get outside the box a little bit. So I hope you find that interesting. I hope you find it distracting, and I hope you have some questions at the end for me. So I am going to come, let's see, I have to do it this way. I'm sorry, Rabbi, I do know how to do this. Let's see, there we go. And start that. Okay, so Rabbi, you should be able to see that now, correct?
Yes, that's correct. Yes.
Awesome. Okay. So for those that don't know me, I'm an endodontist in the Wayne area. I've been in practice since 1988. And I am a perennial outdoors person, originally a Boy Scout from California, who enjoyed and loved the outdoors, and made it sort of my passion to be active in the outdoors all I could get. And it wasn't until probably the early 2000s that I had an opportunity to do something that I had never done before, and that was to take myself to something a little more interesting than just the locations of the Adirondacks and the Catskills and the Appalachian Trail, but to try to get to some of these bigger mountains around the world. And so my journey started actually in 2004 when my wife presented me with an opportunity. She read an article from a writer who went out and climbed Mount Rainier near Seattle, Washington. And he wrote about it and talked about how it was the hardest thing he had ever done, how it was very challenging. And so my wife put the magazine, Outside Magazine, in front of me, and she said, "Happy birthday, you'll probably love this. I would hate it." And so that started my journey around the world, and then culminated a year ago tomorrow with me having left for Nepal to climb Mount Everest. So this map shows you what are called the 7 summits around the world. Of course, in North America, Mount McKinley, otherwise known as Denali, and then in South America, Aconcagua, in Antarctica, the Vincent Massif, in Europe, Elbrus, which is in southern Russia, the Northern Caucasus, in Africa, Kilimanjaro, in the South Pacific, Karstens Pyramid, which is on the island of Papua, and then, of course, in Asia is Everest. Now, you can see from the elevations of these mountains, obviously, Everest is quite a bit higher than anything else. And as a matter of fact, there's nothing outside the Himalaya except for Aconcagua on the border of Chile and Argentina that rises to nearly 23,000 feet. Everything else is higher than that, is going to be in the Himalaya. So for people that go to climb Everest, many of them, unless they've been to the Himalaya and climbed one of the other higher peaks nearby Everest, don't ever get a chance to go to that kind of altitude until they get there. And so that's why, you know, you hear these stories about, are people prepared? Are they not prepared? And a lot of people are just simply not prepared because they don't get to those heights until the opportunity arises. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. This is a little bit of my journey. So you can see, of course, the red dots indicate the peaks that are the 7 summits around the world and the dates that I've climbed them. The yellow dots just represent other mountains that I've climbed around the world during this last 15 years that I started this hobby. So after I had gone to climb Rainier, and for me, I learned how to walk on a glacier. I learned how to be roped up with other individuals, skills that I hadn't had ever before from hiking on the Appalachian Trail and camping for a weekend. I was hooked. And I talked with the guides, and I talked with other people that were there, other climbers like myself. And I learned that there was this idea of climbing the highest peaks on each continent. And so 2 years later, 2006, I went out and I climbed Kilimanjaro. So that was now the highest peak. I went from 14,000 feet at Kilimanjaro, I'm sorry, at Rainier to 19,000 feet now at Kilimanjaro. And while that's not a technical mountain, it certainly does make you take a deep breath and wish that you were at lower elevation. You climb it generally pretty quickly, so there isn't a lot of time for acclimatization, and that's what hurts some people. So the difference between going to 19,000 feet in Africa and taking 7 days to climb to the summit versus going to Everest Base Camp, which is 17,800 feet, and being there for almost 2 months makes a huge difference in your ability to acclimatize and to be able to get even higher. So after I had done that, and of course with the permission of my lovely wife and my 2 children, who said that I could start to climb these other peaks around the world, but I was not allowed to climb Everest. They said, "You'd be crazy. What kind of person climbs Everest, especially after all, you're just a dentist from suburban Philadelphia, right? You're not the kind of person that you should be climbing Everest." And I said, okay, I'm down with that. But here I am approaching the summit of Aconcagua, and you can see there's a little bit of snow there. But you can see I'm not dressed in my full down suit and other things that you'll see later on because the conditions are not that severe. Now there's some serious winds there, but it wasn't nearly as bad as some other places I've been to in the world. One of the sad things about being on some of these wonderful summits is that you don't get a good view all the time. So when you look back to what it looked like there as I was approaching the summit of Aconcagua, it's kind of like broken clouds, partly sunny. And we had been climbing since probably about 2 in the morning. And then we get to the summit, and it starts snowing. And there you go, there's a picture on the summit. And of course, I could have been anywhere. I could have been on top of Mount Misery here in Valley Forge Park, and you'd never know the difference. So one of the other interesting things is that people get to the summits often on adrenaline. That's what drives us. You've prepared, you've planned, you're excited, you're dialed in, and you go, and your body can do an awful lot under an awful lot of stress. And when you get to the summit, that can sometimes be the most dangerous part of the trip. I don't really want to identify people in this photo. This was the team that I went with when I summited Aconcagua. But there was one individual in this team that just after this photo, she basically almost nearly collapsed, and she had to be brought down the mountain. I had to carry her backpack. Somebody else had to have her over one shoulder, and it was a desperate moment. She had fatigued. She had, you know, in the runner world, you call it bonking. She had effectively bonked. Her blood sugar went down. She was not feeling well. She was having altitude issues. And so we have to sometimes rally. And this is where my background in healthcare, my background as a Boy Scout sort of helps me lend a hand. And so most of these trips that I've been on, there's always been an opportunity for me to be the giver, for me to be the one that can help somebody, to be the good team player. You'll learn when we start talking in a little bit about Everest that I was actually the one who was the recipient, and on other mountains as well. So I love to give because sometimes I need to receive as well. This was the next trip. This was in the southern Russia. This is Mount Elbrus. It's 2 twin peaks. And that's a pretty dramatic photo. And again, you could see this at sunrise, almost a cloudless sky, and a beautiful day for climbing. There was still probably another 4 hours plus for us to get to the summit, which is nearly 18,000 feet. And that is not me on the summit there. We're going to say that one was out of place. That's me just playing around on Denali. But when we got to the summit of Elbrus, I sadly found again another storm. And again, another young man from South Africa who had bonked. He didn't drink enough. He didn't eat enough. And again, we had to help him back down to high camp after that. And it puts a stress on everybody else because this is not something that just your guide can manage. It's something that the whole team has to help manage. You've got to feed him food and water that hopefully you have excess of. And you need to monitor where he is in his physiological being, because things could get very dangerous very, very quickly. So this is me and my good friend Brady O'Mara. Brady is a physical therapist here in Wayne. He and I train multiple times a week still, and for the past several years we've climbed in Russia together. We've climbed Denali together. This is our summit on Denali in 2014. And it's good to have a friend. It's good to have somebody that you can share your memories with. And he's a very, very fit and very capable individual. Mountains around the world are all different. This is Cotopaxi in Ecuador, a volcano. And the thing about the beauty and the culture is what drives me to travel to all the places that I'm able to get to. And so it's not merely me trying to stand on top of a peak, and it's not me trying to be a thrill seeker or an adrenaline junkie, because to be perfectly honest, I think jumping out of airplanes is crazy. I don't know who would do that. But at the same time, people think that what I do is crazy. I'm always attached to the ground. I'm never off the ground. Well, that's not entirely true, but I'm almost never off of the ground. And so I feel like I'm in a safer place. I'm connected to something all the time. I just love the experiences. I love the people that I meet, and I love the places that I go. And this is what I'm talking about. I mean, these are kind of like otherworldly scenes to be at the top of a partially dormant volcano. It's not totally dormant, and to be able to look at it from the top is just, it's just exquisite. So that's what drives me to just continue around the world. After going to some of these places you've seen, I did a very crazy climb. This is the peak in Papua, Indonesia. For any of you that know that read maybe Guns, Germs, and Steel by Jared Diamond, you'll know that he's an ornithologist who planted himself in New Guinea for a number of years, wrote a treatise basically on human evolution. Well, this is the north part of that island. This is Papua. They're in a bit of a civil war. They're trying to gain independence from Indonesia. And they also occupy the world's largest gold mine just next to this high peak called Karstens Pyramid. Karstens is almost like a shark fin of granite. And this is me on top. But it's a very cool place, but you have to hike 1 week through the jungle in order to get to the base of the mountain. The mountain climb itself is really a day. You go up, you come down, and then it's 1 week back out of the jungle again. So very, very different from being on ice and snow for the entire time. The elevation is not particularly that high. It's about 16,000 some odd feet. But it's a great rock climb at the top. Again, very different than the tremendous sub-zero temperatures that you endure on Everest and in Antarctica. But just a fantastic place. It's got a lot of urban legend with it. When you come into country there and you go through the different villages and the different regions, you're greeted by the chief of that tribe in that area as you move from one to the next, and then you're held hostage, and they start the bidding usually at about $10,000, and they end up agreeing to about a carton of cigarettes, and they let you go. And so again, you know, it's just sort of the great enjoyment of learning how people survive in different parts of the world. and the stuff that goes on that just makes these things so interesting. This is now moving on to Antarctica, which I like to call the white Mars of Earth. It's really, when you see pictures of Mars and you see pictures of Antarctica, I think it's just the same. It's just the color. It's very, very stark white. There are mountains, but it's a sterile environment. Antarctica on the interior has no birds, no water life, no animal life. So it's a sterile environment, no growth of any kind. It's really only on the coastal areas that you've got the sea life and the bird life going on. And that was my little plug at that time for the American Dental Association, standing on top of the highest place in Antarctica, the Vincent Massif. And now you can start to see the contrast between what I have to wear to be in 30 below weather versus what I wear when I was in the jungles of Papua, Indonesia. A lot of people ask how you go about doing your business. Well, this is the Antarctic bathroom, very sophisticated. We had a horrible storm blow in for 36 hours. And I don't have an after picture, but you can imagine all that was gone. Those little cans probably are somewhere in New Zealand now, because they weren't there after the storm. And the walls were not there later on either. And we would be busy. You can go and mine those walls with saws, and we would cut blocks pretty constantly and build them around our tents and reinforce areas for the bad weather. So leading up to before I went to Everest, unlike some of my other teammates, I decided, the Boy Scout in me said I had to be prepared. So I went ahead and I booked a trip, and I went to a peak called Choi Yu, which is on the Tibetan or Chinese side of the Himalayan range. And in October of 2018, I went ahead and I climbed Choi Yu, the world's 6th highest peak, at almost 26,000 feet. Actually, it's over 26,000, almost 27,000 feet. So this is what's called Camp 1, or low camp at Everest. And I'm sorry, at Choi Yu, I apologize. And you can see how exciting this is and how the environment looks so different from the other pictures and the other places I've shown you so far. And you can see how the camps are placed and how life might be there for a day or a couple of days, or a storm that might come in. And so the moraine, or the melted snow and the rock that's below this, had to be traversed several times. We had to come up and down, so that's where your training is. The elevation there is about 20,000 feet, and from there we would move on and go higher. This is me at the top of Choi Yu, and again, a beautiful day. I did use bottled oxygen for the first time on my trip to the summit of Choi Yu, which was one of the other reasons why I took that opportunity. Fully every other team member, I had 24 team members that went with me to Everest in March of last year, and none of them had been on bottled oxygen except for me. So the Boy Scout in me, I had already been prepared. I knew what to expect. I knew what it felt like, and we'll talk a little bit more about how that was an advantage to me. What I like about this photograph, though, is I had taken off my oxygen mask up there for the time being. I'm at 27,000 feet, or just under. And what I think you want to see is just over my right shoulder, between my right arm up and my head, is a peak. That peak happens to be nothing more than Everest. So I was about 25 miles from Everest. And on the way back down from Choi Yu, I had talked with my climbing Sherpa, a gentleman named Finjo. And Finjo had had about 5 or 6 summits of Everest previous to this climb, and he had had about 8 or 10 climbs of Choi Yu, and he's in his early 30s. And I said to Finjo on the way down, I said, Finjo, that was really hard. You know, what did you think? He said, well, you did well. I said, great. You know, I'm doing this because I want to climb Everest 6 months from now. And I asked him what he thought and whether or not I would be able to do it. And he said, he nodded. He said, you'd be able to do it. I said, is it hard? And he turned around to me and he said, very hard. And after having just climbed this 27,000 foot peak, and probably having the most aerobic and stressful climb of my life, even though it was wonderful, I thought to myself, what could be harder? What could be harder than what I just did? And it kind of put a scare into me. I have to go backwards for a moment, because I told you that earlier when I started my climbing hobby, my family said to me, go ahead, have some fun, but you're not climbing Everest. My mother, my wife, my daughter, my son, nobody wanted me to do this. My staff, they said, you're crazy. And I said, yeah, I am crazy. But I said, no, I won't climb. As I was knocking off these 7 summits and I had finished Antarctica, which was number 6, that's when my wife and my son said to me, so when are you going to climb Everest? And I said, well, I thought I wasn't allowed to climb. And they said, well, you can't not climb it. You've done all 6 now. How can you not do it? I said, well, what are you trying to tell me? And they said, well, if you need to do it, go do it. So against the better wishes of my daughter, who still wishes I didn't climb Everest, I went ahead and booked the trip for Choi Yu as practice. And then after the successful summit of Choi Yu, I went ahead and I booked the trip for Everest. So this is the gear that you need for Everest. And I can give you a little demo. I see if I can do this. Let's hold on for a moment. This might be kind of fun to watch. Let's see if I can pull this up. Hold on. No, that's not it. I apologize. Wait a minute. Here it is. See if I can do that. So let's try this.
You trying to bring something up on the computer or
Is it coming
share?
up or not coming up?
No, it's still the backpacks.
Okay, hold on. Let's see if I can do it.
Is it another image on the computer you're trying to get to?
Yeah,
You just minimize the window.
let's see if I can minimize this. Sorry, I'm trying.
No problem. I've been mentioning to everybody how I was on like a million Zoom calls last week, and more than half of them were about how to use Zoom. So it's not easy.
You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to just get out of this. Sorry, guys. I was not well planned out. So let's go back. And I'm going to just try. It's not coming up. No. Let me try to. I'm gonna stop this in just a moment. Let's. I can't get to it. All right, Rabbi, give me just one moment. Let's see. Maybe I can get to it this way. No.
No problem.
All
Just
right. I was trying to show what I bring, and that was not working. So I'm trying to stop that, and I can't even find where that is to stop.
That's all right. While you're looking for that, I'll just I know several people have joined us since we started. So just a note for those who have joined us since we did the introductions. There'll be an opportunity for questions and answers towards the end. So as we're going through, feel free to write down your questions, to hold them for the end, and feel free to make use of the chat. You can. If you want to write your questions in the chat, and we can write them, you get to them after the formal presentation part is over. Feel free to chat with each other, say hello to everybody, to individuals. It's there for us to connect. So,
Rabbi, I think I might have gotten it. Do you see?
Excellent. Yes.
Yeah, let's try this now.
You can maximize the video. There you go. But we don't hear anything though.
You're not getting any audio? Let's try that again. Are you getting any audio?
No, just your voice live. It's a lot of stuff to fit into those little bags.
Yeah, so I'm just, I was sort of going over everything that went in those duffel bags. And I'm sorry there's no audio, but I'll try to narrate. There's my ice axe and poles. I had 2 pair of goggles. Everything's in duplicate. The Boy Scout in me has me bringing duplicates of sunglasses and goggles and gloves. I had dozens of pairs of gloves because if you lose one pair of gloves, you're going to lose an arm. Multiple layers, base layers, wind layers, not so much rain layers because there's not a lot of rain. Those are all the multiple gloves, water bottles, what are called pee bottles, because when you're in your tent, you're not going outside to use the bathroom in the middle of the night.
Just don't mix them up.
There's sleeping pad. I got a pair of Uggs that I used for when I was relaxing in base camp. This was my crampons that fit on the bottom of my boots. There you go. Those are the pee bottles. Don't drink from those. That's from the other end. Okay. A day pack. So all of this stuff that you're looking at here, that's one sleeping bag, but I had 2 sleeping bags. Yeah, so there's the other sleeping bag. And insulated water bottle carriers so that your water doesn't freeze. It only takes about an hour or 2 for water to freeze. So if you take water in the morning, hot water in the morning, could be frozen in a couple of hours. You're not going to be drinking any water if it's frozen. Those are just chemical hand warmers that were in that bag. My harness and other climbing gear in that bag. 10 pounds of food, that's just snack food. That's not, that goes just with me. That's stuff that I'm going to want to eat when I don't want to eat anything else. More socks in that bag there. More mid-layers of clothing in there. So you can get the idea that there's about 100 pounds of stuff that's going to come with me in those 2 duffels and the 1 backpack that you saw just before. And there was a snowsuit there. And I'm going to try to get out of that. And then we're going to get back to my presentation here. So that was just a sense of everything that eventually fit into those 2 duffel bags and that backpack. So it's a lot of stuff. And when you're packing all this stuff and you're waiting for it to, and you need something, you can imagine how difficult it is to reach in there and get one of those items that you need. And so when you're up at base camp, you get a tent to yourself because you end up having both of these duffels with you and you just have so much junk. When you go higher up on the mountain, you start sharing tents, both to conserve tents and warmth. And then you might have just a portion of gear. You don't even have duffels anymore. You have what's in your backpack. And you can still spread stuff out. And with 3 people in a tent, trying to find stuff could be quite a challenge. So when you got to Kathmandu, we loaded up this stuff. One of the duffels went immediately out to base camp, and 1 duffel stayed with me every day on the trek on the way up. This is me working my way up the Khumbu Valley. So it took 10 days from going from Lukla at 9,000 feet all the way up to Everest Base Camp at just under 18,000 feet. And along the way, we stay in what are called tea houses, which are just small little hotels and just beautiful people, really warm and friendly. But sanitation is definitely a problem. And stomach-borne diseases, very common. Respiratory diseases, very common. So actually, it's a bittersweet moment today because tomorrow is the 1-year anniversary of when I left for Everest. It was March the 26th of 2019 that I left to go. And I was supposed to go this year with my son, Henry. We were going to leave at the end of April, and we were going to fly up and then hike up to Everest Base Camp. That was our goal, and we were going to do some volunteer work along the way. And that had to get canceled. So I was going to go and meet some of my friends, the Sherpa that I had worked with now twice, and go to some of the villages, and that's had to be postponed. But I remember these times, and I remember going up the Khumbu Valley, and I remember how really magnificent it was. And really, for anybody that ever goes to trek in Nepal, this is an easy thing to do. The elevation is a little challenging, but you spend some time getting there. The hiking isn't particularly difficult. And you go with porters and other auxiliary people that'll carry most of your stuff so that you're really just carrying a day pack, day by day. This is the time of year, early spring. This is early April in the town of Fort Say, and they plant potatoes. That's their largest crop. So these are all going to be potato fields, or they are potato fields. You can see all the terraced potato fields below me. You could see the mountains in the back, and you can see I'm working my way up the Khumbu Valley. Part way up near the town of, I can't remember, it's below Farache, there is a monument to some of the past more historical figures in climbing. Scott Fisher being one of them. He's one of the unfortunate gentlemen who perished in the 1996 Everest climbing year, where there were many, many people that died. And so instead of having a memorial to him up at Everest Base Camp, which is difficult for a lot of people to get to, they created this area and this shrine for him and for several other climbers that have been lost over the decades. His body is not there. This is just a shrine to his climbing existence. So as we worked our way up the Khumbu Valley, we came to an area called Lobuche. Lobuche has a peak that's a little over 20,000 feet, and we would camp here for a day, 2 days, and then we would go to Everest Base Camp. But we would come back here for a climbing rotation, and I'll explain a little bit more about that in just a moment or two. And this is me with Lobuche in the background. And you could see maybe I'm beginning my COVID-19 restriction there with my buff on my face and protection from dust and debris. There's a lot of airborne illness, and there's yak dust or yak dung, and people can get what's called Khumbu cough, which is a dry respiratory cough. Gee, does that sound like anything familiar? And that's one of the reasons why they closed Everest climbing season this year. So nobody's going to Everest. This would have been a bad year to be the one that had trained and had prepared and had put all their stuff together and then sadly couldn't come to Everest, because this would be the year that you would be shut down. So they can't tell the difference between the symptoms of COVID-19 and any of the other annoying things that can happen up at Everest between having stomach-borne illnesses or respiratory illnesses. I had a pretty serious cough while I was there, and enough to almost believe that I broke some ribs, even though I didn't. But that's why it is very, very, it's a fine line that you're walking between health and not health. This is what it looks like on the morning that we did climb Lobuche. And again, one of the reasons why I find climbing so exciting, because the views and the idea that you're on a pitch of ice that could be 50, 55, or 60 degrees is really tremendous. But eventually we got our way back to Everest Base Camp. And for anyone that doesn't know, it's not a town. There isn't a coffee shop and a medical facility, a hospital, or anything like that. It's just a bunch of orange and yellow tents all kind of scattered around the moraine. And it is not probably what you think. But in season, when Everest Base Camp is active, you could have upwards of 1,000 people there. And then when obviously it all shuts down, so it gets going right around this time of year. and then it shuts down pretty much at the end of May. Supplies are brought in either by us or by yak or by porters. And you'll see many porters carrying loads of 100 pounds, and they're coming in on these trails in order to drop supplies off. Helicopters will come in, but helicopters are very expensive and they're reserved really for only really necessary trips. And that's me at base camp with a little shout out to Temple Dental School. And this is what happens when you don't shave for a month. So let me go through a little bit of how you approach climbing Everest, because it's a little different from any other mountain. We climb it in stages for practice, and then we climb it to the top at the appropriate time. And so what happens is we stay at base camp for almost six to 7 weeks. We'll take a trip out through the ice fall for what's called rotation number 1. And we'll climb up to Camp 1, which is just under 20,000 feet. And then we'll return back to base camp. And that's an acclimatization hike, and it's an attempt to go through the ice fall. And you begin to learn the difficulties and the complications and the heroic efforts by the Sherpa who keep the ice fall open during this entire 7-week climbing season. They're in there every day, moving ladders and restructuring the route because things collapse and things become dangerous in certain areas. There's avalanches throughout the day. You can hear them, you can see them, and you just hope that you're never in one, obviously. After rotation number 1, we will then go back and we'll climb up all the way to Camp 1, spend the night there, and then come back down. And each time you're doing what's called climbing high and sleeping low. You're challenging your body, you're challenging your physiological body to make more red blood cells, to carry more blood and more oxygen to help you survive at higher altitudes. So this is what starts to break down people, because a lot of people haven't been at this altitude, and they haven't been at this altitude for a regular period of time. So once they're exposed to this, some people do well and some people don't. And you could be a very experienced marathon runner or a triathlete, but all of a sudden at 20,000 feet, you get a horrible headache that you can't get rid of, you get nausea, you can't eat, and many other symptoms. And so sometimes what will happen is you'll feel it when you go up to Camp 1, but you'll come back down and you'll feel better. And the next time you go up, you won't feel it. And you can mitigate some of those symptoms with a drug called acetazolamide, otherwise known as Diamox. But it does help for some individuals and doesn't help for others. So this is the time where you start to see people leave because their bodies can't handle the stress of what has to happen to climb. This is a photograph showing the graphic that I just showed you a moment ago, and it shows you the Khumbu Ice Fall, and it then shows you Camp 1, Camp 2, Camp 3, Camp 4, and the summit. Again, another picture of base camp to give you an idea of what it's like and what life is like while you're there for 7 weeks. And sometimes you just got to stop and take in the beauty of it all and read a book, listen to some music, and just watch the mountains and watch the clouds. Again, another perspective of what Everest Base Camp looks like. Every team, there were 40 teams on Everest this past year. And so each team has their own sort of group tent where you'll have dining facilities. And then you have your individual tents. You have tents where you could take a shower. You have tents where you use a toilet. And every team has their own little campsite, so to speak. So this is the beauty of the Khumbu Ice Fall and the danger of it. Ladders that look like ladders you put outside your house to clean the gutters, aluminum ladders. And that's what you use in order to get around some of these obstacles. Because yes, you could climb each and every one of these with proper ropes, but it would take you twice as long to get from base camp to Camp 1. So a good time to travel from base camp to Camp 1 would be about 5 to 6 hours. And without the ladders, it could probably take you 8 hours or more. Again, just looking at some of the travels, you'll travel as a team usually. There were not a lot of traffic jams at this point because we're all spread out. We're all doing rotations at different times. And so this is not like the summit did and the pictures and the horror that you heard at the end of May when there was a lot of traffic. And we'll talk about that in a moment. But it's just an amazing opportunity to be in just beautiful place and look at stuff, but also paying attention to what's around you because these sheets of ice can break off at any moment. And so when your Sherpa, who's knowledgeable, mine, a gentleman named Pega, who had summited 6 times, this was his 7th Everest summit, and he's only 28 years old. When he says you got to move and not take a picture, you move and you don't take a picture. And just more idea of what it looks like to come through the ice fall. So going up the ice fall can be hard. Coming down the ice fall could be fun. And so when I said I'm always attached to the ground, I would say the exception is when you're rappelling like this to get down a little faster. We climb a lot in the night because when you don't have the sun on the ice, you don't have the avalanches. More avalanches occur during the daytime, during the sunlight hours, because it warms up the environment. And so we'll often leave at 2 or 3 in the morning, and we'll try to get to our destination at or around sunrise or before the sun hits the area that we're in. There are a few exceptions to that, but that's certainly the norm when you're climbing through the ice fall. Here you can see we're working our way to the top of the ice fall. And the sunrise is starting to happen, and we're going to try to get to Camp 1 and above this ice sheet that you're looking at before the sun hits it. Now, this is what Camp 1 looks like. It's a different place than base camp. You're now firmly on glacier, and it's a lot more remote. This is our camp, so we had a tent for the Sherpa and for cooking. We didn't have a communal dining tent that we could go into. So everything that we ate and everything that we did were out of our own 2-person tents that you can see in the background. You don't walk around much around there because there are crevasses everywhere. So you're really restricted to a little zone that you learn pretty quickly. Stay there and don't veer off and don't go exploring. That's a view looking at it from the other way, and you can see that's part of the Everest wall. That's the Gibraltar shoulder there, and we'll end up climbing up and over that later on when we go to the summit. This is a view looking from Camp 1 at what's called the Western Combe and the Lhotse face ahead of us. And so the peak Lhotse is straight ahead and up that ice wall. Everest is the peak rising to the left, and Nuptse is another 8,000 meter peak that rises to the right. You can see what looks like terraced ice there ahead of us and ahead of the tents that are in the slide here. We end up having to negotiate all of those little terraces. And while they don't look like they're a lot, each of those could be 30 to 50 feet high. And so it's a very slow route to go around and over these. This is traveling through one of them and trying to get across. There are ladders that are both horizontal and vertical. And here's me on a horizontal ladder. I'm looking over probably a 50-foot drop below me, and I'm walking on an aluminum ladder with crampons on my boots that have to grab onto those aluminum rungs so that I don't fall off. This is a picture of the Lhotse face, considered one of the more dangerous parts of Everest next to maybe the ice fall. It's, I think, something like 55 degrees of hard-packed ice, and it can be quite windy. Here's a picture of the approach to it. And so we would take trips on one of our rotations after going to Camp 1 and coming back was going to Camp 2, which is at the far end of the Western Combe, where we spent a couple of days. And then we tried to get to Camp 3, which was our intended goal on one day, but the weather was not cooperating. I said to you earlier that I've been very fortunate. One of the things for me is that every summit I've climbed around the world, I've reached in a single attempt. And when I talk with my other climbing peers, that's not the case. People have to go back and climb mountains like Denali and Aconcagua because the weather doesn't cooperate, or their health doesn't cooperate, or other conditions don't cooperate. So I was always very fortunate. But on the day that I went to climb to Camp 3, I had a respiratory infection. And so on the way up to that camp, I was not feeling well. I was dragging and I was slower than most people. And on a trip that should have taken me somewhere around 5 to 6 hours max to get to Camp 3, I had been still well short of it, probably more than an hour short of it. And I had been out on the ice for almost 8 hours before I had to turn around and return back to Camp 2. And so I had returned after that to base camp, and I was really discouraged by that. And I was facing possibly being one of these people that would drop out. We had gone from a team of 24 climbers to now a group of about 15. We lost people through leg injuries. One person climbing up that day got hit by some falling ice and he twisted his ankle. He no longer could participate in the trip and he had to go home. Somebody else had severe altitude sickness because that's at about 23,000 feet and they had to back away from the trip. So lots of things started happening the higher you went and your body started talking to you. Some people were fighting it and trying to hold on and they would have to drop out later on. But I was really discouraged. I was now on antibiotics. I was on cough medicine, antihistamines, and I was coughing so hard that I thought I had broken a couple of ribs on my lower right side. I happily was not, but I was not getting better, and we were looking for the opportunity to be able to go climb to the summit. So we returned, and we were waiting for about 10 days for the weather to improve. And we'll talk more about that in a moment. This is just our team out for a walk. We didn't even climb the Lhotse face that day. We just went to the base of the glacier there. That's all we did. And then we turned around and came back. This is me climbing up that day to try to get to Camp 3. And you don't see the pain inside of me that I wasn't feeling very well. But this is a great slide that shows how steep this terrain is. You can see the people below me and how steep it is where I am above them. So I made it back to base camp and I was recovering. It was early May, it was Mother's Day. And so I went ahead and had this picture taken. I went ahead and wrote that out on toilet paper and put that on Facebook. Much to my surprise, I had somebody say to me that was a perfectly good waste of toilet paper. And yet my mother said to me, she said, "Thank you very much. Where did you get a perfectly rectangular piece of ice to write that on?" So, you know, everybody had a different opinion of what I was doing, but just to inject a little bit of humor and take a little break from what was going on. So here we were now. They had completed putting in what are called fixed lines to the summit. This was around May 14th or May 15th. And now all the teams were looking at when they could take their teams to the summit. And it would take about 6 days when you left base camp to basically get to the summit. And then you'd have to return. And that would involve having to go to Camp 1 and then 2 and then 3 and then 4 and then the summit. So remember now we had done 4 different rotations over a period of about 5 weeks, 5 or 6 weeks. We had climbed Lobuche. We had gone through the ice fall. We went through the ice fall again to get to Camp 1. We went through the ice fall again to get to Camp 2. We went through the ice fall again to get to Camp 3. And each time you go through the ice fall, you got to come back through the ice fall. So that's probably the most dangerous part every time is going through that ice fall and hoping that you're not going to be one of these avalanche victims. We had none this year or last year. And so we had no catastrophes leading up to the summit day. Some teams tried to push on May 16th to the summit, hoping to avoid all of the traffic. In 1996, there were a lot of deaths because weather forecasting wasn't as good, and a lot of people got trapped in storms. But one of the things that you don't hear now is you don't hear about deaths on Everest because of storms. If the storms are bad, we're going to sit them out because the weather forecasting is so good. And so this year in particular, 2019, we found ourselves in a predicament where the only really good days that were forecasted, and again, the forecasting is so much more reliable, ended up being around May 23rd and May 24th. And that's when everybody went to the summit. And that's when you had, at this point, 280 climbers and all the support staff that went with them, my Sherpa and any other team member and their Sherpa, and you made your way to the summit. And so that's what caused the crowds. Crowds weren't really there the other 6 weeks that I was there. It was just those last 2 days when we were all trying to vie for the summit. The teams that went on May 16th had disastrous results. Actually, one person died. Several people, including some of the Sherpa, got frostbite. And as a matter of fact, because I wasn't feeling well, I went to the medical tent and I even encountered some of these Sherpa. One had to be helicoptered out. He had fallen on the Lhotse face and wasn't wearing a helmet. And another one had frostbite of his toes because they had attempted to do something that really they shouldn't have been doing. It was too windy and too cold, and their attempt to try to avoid the crowds met with some disaster. So this is us coming back on another day trying to get up the Lhotse face into Camp 3. And I'm going to go through another short little side story here for a moment. So I said I wasn't feeling well on my first rotation to Camp 3. And I rested for 10 days, and I was still not feeling well. I eventually went off the medications. I thought that they were making me feel worse rather than better, and I took my chances. I also met with the team leaders who at the time said, Bruce, you know, you performed really well on Choi Yu with extra oxygen. And I know we've got oxygen positioned for you when you get to Camp 3 and Camp 4 in the summit, but maybe you would benefit from having a canister of bottled oxygen when you leave this time Camp 2 to work your way up to the summit. And they talked me and 3 other climbers into doing that. And of course, I had no ego. It's not like you guys are asking me how much oxygen I used to get to the summit. And I said, sure, no problem. And so on my summit attempt, when we were given the green light to go, I went from base camp to Camp 1 to Camp 2, rested for a day there. And then that morning at 5 in the morning, I put on an 18-pound oxygen tank. So in case anyone's interested, a 3,000-liter tank of oxygen weighs 18 pounds. I put that in my backpack and I started my way to Camp 3. I had traveled 8 hours a few weeks earlier and never made it there. And on bottled oxygen, I started out and I was feeling better than I had ever felt since, you know, the previous 2 or 3 weeks. I was ahead of the pack. I was feeling good. My Sherpa was radioing in our location multiple times. And I found myself in Camp 3 in just over 4 hours. So I had doubled my pace in order to get there on oxygen. And I actually pulled into Camp 3 and I was the only person there. I was the first climber in my group to arrive that morning. And I came into my tent, unpacked my sleeping bag, crawled inside of it, and I started to cry. I cried because I actually thought to myself, you know, I might make it to the summit after all. I was very, very dejected before that point. And finding out that I could get there and feel good and be rested for a whole day before I'd have to leave for Camp 3 or Camp 4 was just tremendous for my ego. So what happened after that becomes the summit odyssey. Once you get to Camp 3, you're living on bottled oxygen. If you're in a tent and you're not moving, you're going to set the flow rate for about 1 liter per minute. But if you're moving, you're going to set it from anywhere from 3 to 4 liters per minute. So I had a fresh bottle of oxygen there that I'd be able to access for the next morning when we would leave. And we would leave at about 5 in the morning again, and we would climb up the remainder of the Lhotse face and over what's called the Geneva Spur and into Camp 4. And we did this while the other half of our team, which was a day ahead of us, was now at Camp 4, and they had headed to the summit the night before. This is what's called the yellow band. You walk on the ice and the glacier that is the Lhotse face. But there is about a 300-foot band of rock that you have to traverse in your spiked shoes with your crampons on. And it's extremely dangerous. And you can see the multiple ropes because there's ropes for this year, there's ropes that are still up for last year. And you got to pay attention to which ropes look like you should be attached to and which ropes you feel like you shouldn't be attached to. A little quick education, I'm using something called an ascender connected to my harness, which looks like a giant can opener. And I can slide it up that fixed rope. It does not have a reverse, so it locks in place. If I fall, it will automatically stop me at that position and hold me. And so it's a great braking device for accidents or losing grip. And it's also an aid to move you up the mountain, because when your feet don't have as great a purchase, you're using your arms to pull you every time as well. This is the last part going over the Geneva Spur, and you can see how steep it really is. And you can see the line there. This is on summit, in getting from Camp 3 to Camp 4. And you can see we're wearing goggles and masks. And now we look like we're aliens for the most part, and we're wearing our down suits. This is resting at the top of the Geneva Spur. I'm going to use my mouse to show you that Camp 2 is all the way down here. This is where we came from 2 days earlier. Camp 1 is all the way here, and then base camp is below that and all the way down and into that valley. So I left Camp 3 at about 5 in the morning. I pull into Camp 4 at about 11 in the morning, and I'm feeling pretty good. I arrive, and I immediately go into my tent, and I again unfurl my sleeping bag, and I crawl into it. And I'm met there by, of course, my Sherpas with me. And I'm going to be in a tent with 2 other climbing buddies of mine, but neither of them had showed up yet. One showed up about an hour later. The sad part was the third person ended up about 4 hours later, and he was suffering from severe altitude sickness. He had arrived at the point where I'm showing you right now in this slide, which is the top of the Geneva Spur, looking at Everest, and that's the triangle face of Everest right there. And he was non-communicative. He was at that point, and we could hear on the radio that he wasn't moving. His Sherpa said he won't move, and he wasn't talking. And it took about an hour or so to get him to move, and it was only maybe about 400 yards to get from there to the tent that I was in. But he just wouldn't move, and eventually came in, and we had turned up his oxygen. I had to spoon feed him peanut M&Ms and feed him sips of water until he could talk to me, which took about another hour. And at that point, he decided he wasn't going to leave for the summit later that day. He was happy to just be alive and be in the tent with us. So now there were 3 of us in a tent, and it doesn't really show here, but it's pretty windy. And in an hour or 2 after this photo was taken, it started to blow snow sideways. This is what Camp 4 looks like. I call it the zombie apocalypse of Everest because it's full of a lot of artifacts. You've got tent pieces from 10 and 20 years ago, and cans from 10 and 20 years ago, and oxygen bottles from 10 and 20 years ago. They talk about how dirty Everest is, and I would say most of Everest is fairly clean, except for Camp 4. It is very hard to remove gear from Camp 4. And I sadly regret not doing my part and taking a handful of stuff down with me. Your brain is not really functioning that well when you're up there. You're really on survival mode. And if someone would have said to me, or I had the forethought to say, listen, I can take 2 of these things and stuff them in my backpack and bring them down and do some good for people, I would do it. But I didn't, and I kind of regret it to this day. So I arrived at 11 in the morning. The radio is abuzz from the Sherpa and from the radio in our tent. I'm listening to some of my teammates that had just summited, and they're coming down from Everest. That's Team 1. And I'm listening to people that are actually coughing up frothing blood, so they've got pulmonary edema. I've got people that say to me that they're waiting in lines for 2 hours because the lines are not moving, it's too crowded. And I'm thinking to myself, oh my gosh, I'm supposed to be leaving at 7:30 that night, climb to the summit myself. How is that going to actually happen? And so I spent the day, rather than resting, I spent it panicking. I ended up being able to eat and get all of my gear ready, but you can't imagine how quickly time goes. And with the wind and the snow, I was thinking to myself, how are we ever going to get out there? And amazingly enough, as the sun went down and my teammates had returned to Camp 4 from the summit and everybody was safe, we were now getting ready ourselves to leave. And so I had not slept since 5 in the morning. I'd been resting, but I hadn't slept. And now it was 7:30 at night. I put my rest of my climbing gear on, checked everything. I made sure that I had medications where they needed to be for emergencies. I made sure that I had my water where it needed to be and my food where it needed to be, because we weren't going to be able to stop and have any kind of picnic style meals. We were going to be moving and trying to move constantly. And I got the word from my Sherpa to get out of the tent and to get ready to go. So it had started to get dark. We had headlamps on, and we started our way up the triangle face, which is this face right here. And we would spend about 4.5 hours to go up there at 7:30 at night to get to an area called the balcony that I'll show you in a moment. And the balcony is a natural, safe area to rest and to change out your oxygen tanks. So the first part of our journey, we went up and we saw some people being lowered down. And the horrific events of 2019 with 11 deaths didn't really ring true to us at that point because we hadn't gotten the intel. I didn't know that people had died at that point. That was not something that was shared with us. We were all still just probably, in the moment. And these people that they were bringing down were actually deceased climbers. Later along the way, I would see 2 or 3 other deceased climbers that I would have to climb over. And that was the sad truth about what Everest is all about. Not what I signed up for, certainly not something that you would normally see. And it takes your breath away. And if you're like me and you're a healthcare person, you're a Boy Scout or a Boy Scout leader, you want to help people. That's what you want to do. And there's just no way to help these people. And that's the sad reality that I've had to deal with. But anyway, we worked our way up, and we really didn't take a break until we got to the balcony. It was a nice night. It ended up being cloudy with very, very light snow, but it was super quiet and nobody was talking. So everybody's walking with a headlamp and nobody's saying anything. It's just one foot after the other over some very, very steep terrain. This gives you a little sense now of what we did, and we did it in the middle of the night. So it's about 11:30 and we're on the bottom right here at the balcony. We would rest there and we would swap out oxygen tanks. So I had a tank of oxygen that was half used. I would leave it there. Our Sherpa team had positioned new tanks of oxygen there for us days earlier. And we would now swap out and I'd get a fresh tank, which would give me 10 hours of oxygen at 3 liters per minute. That should be enough time to get me up to the summit and back down. And still then, even if I used all that oxygen, have another half a tank to get me back down to Camp 4. So we're climbing in the night, and now you're the most exposed. When you start going up this southeast ridge here, it is literally 12,000 feet down to Nepal on your left and 12,000 feet down to Tibet on your right. And all you have is a thin rope that's saving your life at any moment. And luckily, because we left early at night, we were one of the first teams up, so there was no traffic coming down. So we're climbing in the night. I have no idea what it looks like because it's dark, and I'm really just hoping that everything's going to work out. But I felt good, and I was dialed in and I was comfortable. And my Sherpa was radioing back to base camp, and they were keeping records of me and our progress. So they knew how fast I was going. They knew how I felt. They knew how much food and drink I had had and how much oxygen I had had. And so at every point, they were supposed to tell me it's safe to continue on or to turn around. And this is where some of the other teams are not dialed in as well. And this is where some of the other catastrophes happen and some of the other fatalities, because people would either ignore those warnings. Maybe they had Sherpa that were radioing into team people lower on the mountain, but some of those climbers would just ignore the warnings and they would keep going. And so some climbers would make it to the top or nearly to the top, but they would never be able to return. This is actually, when I came back down, this is what the triangle looks like of the face of Everest. Below me is Camp 4, and then this is the path up this path, and then this shoulder, this turn to the right, and this is the balcony right here that you saw in the earlier slide. This is the southeast ridge that you follow all the way up to the summit. Luckily, 10 hours into my trip, I stood proudly on the summit of Mount Everest with my Sherpa Pega and 4 others of my teammates and their Sherpa. And then along with a dozen and then 2 dozen and then 3 dozen other people, there's not a lot more room on there. So we weren't there for very long, maybe about 15 minutes. And with that completed, I now had to do the harder part of my trip, because as my son had once famously quoted, getting to the top, Dad, is only halfway. And I want you to make the full round trip. So again, as I had shared earlier in this presentation, this is where the dangerous stuff happens. Either you're weak because you haven't ate or drank enough. And sadly, even though I told you that I did, it's never enough. I can't tell you how many calories you must burn in traveling for 20 hours. I mean, this was 10 hours from Camp 4, but it was 5 hours before that to get to Camp 4. So that's 15 hours. I didn't eat thousands of calories while I was waiting in my tent to leave for Everest. And along the way, I had sips of water when I could, which was maybe 2 or 3 times in that 10-hour period. And I ate maybe 3 gels and 2 Cliff Bars. So it was not like I had an awful lot of food. So my body was definitely in a vulnerable place, and yet I continued to push myself through everything. Luckily for me, there I am with Pega. He's a showman. He took his mask off, and he told me to leave mine on. So I followed his instructions. So here's the interesting picture. This made the news worldwide on the day before me. This is my picture having been to the summit and having come back down. And this is looking at the Hillary Step from the vantage point of the south to north ridge traverse. And you can see the crowds of climbers up there on the Hillary Step and just below it. And now I want to juxtapose that. And here's what it looks like when you're clipped into a rope. And when you pass people on the way up, they're using an ascender, which again is a locking device, but you can't use it going down. So you're simply using a carabiner like this. And when you get to somebody and you have to go around them, you have to undo that, and that's your lifeline. You're now separated from that rope the moment you unclip that, and you hug the person that you're going around, whoever they are, from wherever they are. They become your best friend for a moment until you clip in behind them and continue your journey down. So just going back and graphically showing you the trip. So the picture that you see on your right is essentially taken from what they call this Cornice Traverse, this area right here. And the climbers are up on this ridge here, this Hillary Step, and then the final summit ridge on the north side. And so that's the vantage point. And so you saw my picture in my crowd. This was the picture that made the news 24 hours before me. And this was later in the morning. So this was maybe 10 in the morning, which was the reason why our team decided to leave 7:30 at night and arrive on the summit at 5:30 in the morning, rather than arrive on the summit at 9 or 10:30 in the morning and face that kind of traffic. So it was a brilliant decision by my team leaders, and it really paid off well. So I felt very safe. I wasn't sitting around for 2 or 3 hours waiting and and burning through precious oxygen. I always felt like I was safe. And so for me, I can embellish my adventure and say how death-defying it was, but in reality, I had things in control all the time, and it made me feel so comfortable the entire time I was there. This is coming back down to Camp 4, and again, a look at how surreal this area really is. And another picture from Camp 4. And then, of course, climbing back down the Khumbu Ice Falls to get back down to base camp. And the beauty of the area around me. How tremendously, surreal it all really is. And how dangerous it is. Here's a snow bridge, and it could collapse at any time. And again, the path to get in and out through the ice fall. But happily, I made it back to Everest Base Camp after about a 7-day round trip to the summit and back. I was up for 32 hours. I think the final part of the story is after I came back down from the summit. That was 14 hours round trip from when I left this Camp 4 to back to Camp 4. I took a 2-hour nap. I was awake and packed up all my gear, and my Sherpa and I and a bunch of our gear made it back down to Camp 2. So we went all the way back down to Camp 2 that day on summit day, and that was about 32 hours. And I collapsed there, and I took a 10-hour sleep in my sleeping bag, and I absolutely passed out there. I made it home, much to the surprise, not to the surprise, but to the delight of my family. I have to say at this moment that I have a lot of people that I would thank to make this possible. I have my wonderful staff that were nervous but encouraging along the way. Of course, all the people affiliated with climbing that helped show me the way over the years, and especially in those last 2 climbs to Choi Yu and to Everest. The logistics are everything. This is like anything else in life. You get what you pay for. This was certainly not a cheap expedition, but at the end of the day, it made it worthwhile because I felt comfortable. I never felt in danger in the ways that people think. And that's because I planned, I prepared, and I used the right people to help me out. So International Mountain Guides and Greg Voronich, and then my Sherpa Pega, the head Sherpa there, Fanuru and Jang Bu, and all the other Sherpa that helped make it possible. And then, of course, the most respect goes to my family, my wife, Susan, my daughter, Caroline, and my son, Henry, for keeping me grounded and for keeping me in their prayers. And so that was very important, being able to communicate with them on a regular basis through modern communication made it possible to chat with them through satellite texting. And they were my rock, and I felt like they were there with me the entire time. And so I'm happy to be back. I'm happy to have given this presentation today. I hope I didn't put any of you asleep. There's so much more to talk that it's hard to sometimes just put it into an hour or an hour and a half. But I did my best, and I'm certainly happy to take any questions that anybody has.
I'm gonna jump in with the first question, and I'll for those of you who have questions also, I'm sure there are a million because I've been writing down questions as you've been going. Some of them you've answered along the way, but if you have a question when it's your turn, take a turn. You can just unmute yourself, ask your question, and then put yourself back on mute if you would. But my question is, you said you left on March 26th, and May 23rd, I'm guessing, is the day you hit the summit. And then when did you, because you said you spent 6 or 7 weeks at base camp, like what's the timing? You walked out of your house on March 26th, you came back on when?
I came back, I arrived back in Philadelphia on May the 29th. And so when I left March 26th, I was in Kathmandu on March the 28th. And on March 30th, I think, is when we flew from Kathmandu to Lukla. You arrive in Lukla, and now it's all foot power from there. There's no motorized vehicles. There's no roads. It's only paths up the Khumbu Valley. So we took about 10 or 11 days to get to Everest Base Camp. And then from there, we did those multiple rotations I talked about. And then we went to the summit and then came back down. Now, I would have hiked all the way back out, but because I had a commitment to run one of those dental missions in early June, I took a helicopter out of Everest Base Camp back to Kathmandu. So it's not really my style. I would have liked to have completed the walk out, but I did what I needed to do to make everybody happy.
Feel free to chime in with questions at this point. I'm gonna offer up a poll question, so just answer the poll question when you see it.
And I hope we do soon. Your presentation was absolutely amazing. More than 20 years ago, I read the book Into Thin Ice, Into Thin Air by John Krakauer, and I've been so fascinated by this. And your pictures really put a face to all the places he went. I was wondering if you had read the book, and if you did it give you any inspiration to start climbing?
So I read the book, and I wouldn't say that it gave me inspiration. I mean, it's certainly something that anybody who does what I do has read, plus so many more accounts of other dangerous peaks around the world. What it did for me was it gave me chills. It gave me chills when I was going up the Khumbu Valley to know that I had read about how you have to travel up the Khumbu Valley and stay at tea houses. It gave me chills to be at Everest Base Camp, arriving there and saying, oh my God, I'm at Everest Base Camp. I had read that book in 1997. It never occurred to me that I would be one of those people going to Everest. At that time, I had not started my journey of high mountaineering or ice and rock climbing or anything like that. I was just a young guy who was a dentist from suburban Philadelphia. And this was just sort of crazy. And the guys that went and did this stuff were either professional or serious amateurs. So it never occurred to me in reading that book when it came out, and though I was mesmerized by it as well, that I could ever be in any of those places. But like you got a sense, you had an imagination of what this was like. But I went there, and every time I went to a place that I remembered in the book, I was just in awe. The first time I went through the Khumbu Icefall, it was, oh my gosh, I'm in the Khumbu Icefall. This is crazy. And the first time I was on the Lhotse Face. And I'm thinking about the rescue of those people like Beck Weathers and some of the others that came off of the balcony to get back to Camp 4, and all of the things that they dealt with, and living out in that environment for a day or 2 days in violent weather is just amazing to me. So I wouldn't say that it inspired me, but it made me just shiver every time I got to one of those landmarks.
Yeah, I was thrilled to see the picture of Lhotse Face, because that was the one thing that has stuck out in my mind more than these 20 years since I read the book. Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. Hi, Diane. I'm so happy that you're on here. Take care, everyone.
Bruce, I have Rob Grossman. Thank you so much for sharing. I mean, my goodness, it's been a long time since I've been on a webinar where I've viscerally felt some of what you were experiencing without all of that incredible reality trauma of it. But my God, phenomenal. And just 2 questions. One would be, did you meet up with Eric Weinenmayer, the blind climber who ascended Everest successfully in 2019? And if you didn't meet up with him, do you know about him? And then the second question would be, how does life occur for you now? I mean, after accomplishing something like this, here we're in a pandemic, sure, but just even day-to-day normal life, how does life occur? Your family, your work, your friends, your values, how has that been impacted?
So I'll get back to your first question. Is notably, I did know about Eric's climbing. I did not run into him. One of the interesting things is there's social distancing at Everest. And so every team keeps to themselves so that we don't spread disease. So a lot of the skills that we're practicing now, I practiced while I was up there. I learned them while I was up there. We had another woman from Florida who was staying not far away from us. She was in a small team, and I can't remember her name now. She was the Marine helicopter pilot that had lost a leg, and she wanted to be the first female amputee to get to Everest. And she was lucky but unlucky. Her team of about 5 people wanted to go and do the summit on the 16th of May that I said turned out to be a bad idea. And it turned out to be a bad idea for her as well. She was too slow and the weather was too compromising. They ended up having to turn around. She was fine, but this was, you know, the group where you had frostbite of the Sherpa and one serious head injury from one that had fallen. And so, but we never got a chance to interact because they discouraged us from inviting people into our camp or being invited into other people's camps. So nobody was giving any kind of lectures like I'm doing now, which would have been great. Nobody was holding some open meetings like you would think. You could kind of pass people around a little bit on the main highway. They call it, you know, Main Street or Broadway that goes through the major part of the Everest Base Camp area. But for the most part, you're staying in your own little community so that you don't spread disease. Getting to your second question, what does it mean for me now? I would say that I've tried to put past my type A personality that had me go, go, go and try to achieve and achieve and achieve. Because the biggest question people ask is, well, you've done all 7 summits, now what are you going to do? And I don't really look at it that way. I've kind of taken a philosophical approach that I've done that, and that's an exciting part of my life. But that's like saying to somebody that graduated high school, well, you've done that, now what are you going to do? Or somebody that's read a book. Well, you read that book, now what are you going to do? You know, I just think of these as moments in my life. They've taught me so much. They've brought me so much encouragement into what I'm capable of. So, you know, there's a lot of introspection when you do this. There's a lot of downtime, a lot of time alone. I didn't say this, but some of the loneliest times I've had actually occur on these expeditions, Everest being no exemption. I would go into my tent at about 7 o'clock at night after dinner with my group because it was too cold. As soon as the sun went down, it was too cold to be alone, to be outside. So you'd go into your tent, you'd crawl into your sleeping bag, and you would read, listen to music, or watch, you know, maybe some video that you'd brought with you, and you would entertain yourself. And you would be 12 hours alone until the sun came up, and you had breakfast at 8 in the morning. That was life at base camp. And so you had a lot of time to think. And sometimes that's good and sometimes that's bad. But I channeled all that into being grateful for what I have, grateful for the world around us, grateful for the wonderful people in the company that I've met and I've had through all of my adventure. But I don't really find myself now, and maybe because I don't have a goal, which is, you know, not such a great thing, but it is what it is. I'm not looking for that next thing anymore. I feel grateful for what I've done. I feel like I can do anything, and if something comes up, then so be it. I like sharing the idea that there's a lot to learn from doing this that extends beyond just the mountaineering skills, but it's things for leadership. It's things for preparation. It's things for knowing yourself and knowing others and helping. Those are the things that I like to share and to help people with these days.
It's beautiful. Thank you so much, Bruce.
There was a picture of everybody climbing when you showed of Mount Elbrus, and you said there was like that long line of people. The picture was taken from far away. Who took that picture?
You know, I'm glad that you asked that question because there is a story to that. And you would wonder, why would that picture even exist? So Elbrus has a hut system, and you can climb it from the north or you can climb it from the south. We climbed it from the north. And the night before we went to the summit, we stayed in a hut that's called, it's a very large yurt. So it's a round room with a tin ceiling and wood walls. And it basically has beds all the way around the outside circle. And then it has an open space in the middle. And there were, I don't know, 15 or 20 of us that were staying there that night. There was one gentleman who had cystic fibrosis, and he was from the UK, and he had a guide and he had a photographer, and he wanted to be the first person with cystic fibrosis to climb to the summit of Elbrus. And so because of his limitation, cystic fibrosis is obviously a lung disease. And so he left earlier than us in order to make the attempt. And he actually camped out that night, not far from where that picture was taken, so that he would have a jump on getting to the summit the next day. He set out to get there, but his health prevented him from getting there, and his team of 3 or 4 people returned. The photographer, upon returning, caught us on our way up and snapped that picture. Hence, that's why we have that picture. So it was serendipitous that it occurred.
Incredible. You mentioned bonking. Can you prevent bonking, or is that something that happens to people just because of their bodies, regardless of what you do to try to not bonk?
You can reduce the opportunity for that by drinking and by eating and by having tested yourself with that prior to trying to go to do a summit for the first time. So everybody's body is different. You know, there are all sorts of different foods out there, higher in carbs, higher in proteins, higher in caffeine, and everybody reacts differently. And some people get sick from certain things or stomach upset from certain things. I would say that, you know, the best thing you can do is you need to eat and drink. But the problem is you're being told that the best method is every hour to stop for something to eat or drink. There's sort of a natural rhythm that you can get into. When you're lower on the mountain, that's easy to do. And when it's not so cold and you're not you're not hanging from somewhere, it's a more doable thing to do. But when you're up there on summit day, you're going 4 or 5 hours at a time before you're stopping, and you're really not getting the nutrition that you can. And so I would say, you know, to anybody, you're always going to be told you need to eat or drink. But when push comes to shove in these last final moments, you don't do that because all of a sudden it's not feasible to do it. So that's the risk. And then the idea is, well, is your body prepared? And maybe it is, and maybe it isn't. When we did eventually leave for the summit, there were 11 climbers that went, and all 11 in our group did summit.
I have one last question. When you're going over the mountain, is there only one path? Or, I mean, at some point it looked like there was only one path, like at the very end, but can people just go up different ways from Everett Base Camp or Camp 1, whatever? Can you go up different ways? How do you know where to go?
Right. So the normal path, or the path that someone like I would follow, was this one path that 99% of the climbers followed from the south. So climbing from Nepal this year, that was the route. Everybody followed that route. Now you can climb from the Chinese side, that's from the north. And I didn't show you, but as we were approaching the summit early in the morning at sunrise, you could see the climbers coming up. And when we stood on the summit, you could see the climbers coming up from the Tibetan side that morning. And so we were all arriving at the same time. I could have climbed down into Tibet if I wanted to, but I would have been arrested because I didn't have a Chinese permit to be on the Chinese side. But there are other routes that people will choose on certain parts of the mountain, but those are reserved and used by very experienced climbers, and that would not be me. So some people will try to do things, they'll try to establish a new route, but the fear in that is they have to put in their own rope, and then they have to also be subject to all of the dangers that are in that unknown route. And so that's what makes it so much more dangerous, and that's why really the commercial part of climbing Everest is along this one path that everybody follows.
Any more questions out there? I see by our poll that everyone who answered said that they would not climb. Not a chance. I'm perfectly happy looking at pictures of someone else's climb. There were other options, but that was the popular one.
This is Mark Hager. Hi. I read the book Up in Thin Air, and I got scared just sitting at home reading the book. So it's a really incredible accomplishment that you have. Do you have any fear of heights at all?
You've been talking to somebody. So let it be known that I have a slight healthy fear of heights. And it's a weird fear. I am more uncomfortable 8 feet up on a ladder than I am on the southeast ridge of Everest connected to a rope. So it's that sort of unsupported area that scares me more than anything else. So I do have a little fear of heights. Maybe that's a survival thing. I mean, I think people should. I'm not fearless. Please don't misinterpret who I am. I'm not fearless.
And when you walk on the horizontal ladders, are you okay with that?
No, not really. So the worst part was that when they set those up, they change. This is like an ever-changing place. And sometimes those horizontal ladders are not horizontal, but they're actually kind of tilted like this. And that can make them that much more interesting to try to walk across. And I got to tell you, there's a technique for doing it. You're supposed to hold the ropes. There are these handrails, basically. They're just ropes. But you're supposed to hold those behind you like you're a ski jumper, with your arms all the way back behind you with pressure, like you're hanging by those forward, like you're leaning forward. And that's how you're supposed to walk across, because that's the most stable way to do it. But I got to tell you, we did practice that on some places on flat ground down at a base camp. And for most people, when you go to Everest, you've never crossed anything like this. You've never done anything like that before. I tried to practice it at home, but it's certainly nothing like it is when you're up there in the ice fall. And it's scary. It's definitely scary.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for being here. Bruce, thank you as well.
I have a question.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Hi, I'm Andrea. I'm Bruce's sister, calling in from Florida. And Bruce, what a marvelous presentation. There were a lot of photos that I hadn't seen before. And, I read your magazine article, and every time you tell this story, it's just so riveting. And I learned so much more about what you experienced, and it gets me emotional because I'm just glad that you did this and that you're home safe and you've accomplished so much, and we're really, really proud of you. But I actually have a question. So I think that you have taken dental supplies with you on all of your climbs. And I think that you told me that you've actually done dental procedures on Sherpas. So what did you do on Everest?
So for the rest of the audience that's listening, this was not a setup question. I'm actually surprised to hear this. I'm happy that my sister is on this. And of course, we were communicating via satellite communication during the time that I was away. And I could feel her energy and her support. She, like many others, helped me get to the top of this mountain. But she does remember a story that I have told her, because on both Choi Yu and then again on Everest, I took some minimal materials with me because I wanted to be that helper that I always am. And so I brought stuff to repair broken teeth or re-glue crowns or things like that, whether it would be a team member of mine or whether it would be one of the Sherpa. And on Choi Yu, I found an interesting problem with some of the Sherpa. They live at high altitude in some of those villages below Everest Base Camp. But when they get up higher, you run into problems where it's just naturally colder. And if you have a rotted tooth, you might develop pain that you didn't have at a lower elevation. So this was not uncommon. And I would get presented with these people through my team, management people, to say, could you help them out? So I found that I was able on Choi Yu to take earplug wax that you can buy, you know, for earplugs. And I would stuff that into those teeth, and that would help these people not have pain when they went higher up the mountain. And I was like a hero for just putting wax on their teeth. And so I decided to bring more stuff with me when I came to Everest, and I brought some temporary cements and some other actual dental temporary materials. And I spent a couple of days helping out with different Sherpa in my team, and then some other Sherpa. I went to the Everest medical tent, and I became a favorite over there because they would radio to me when they had a Sherpa that needed something filled in. And so I wasn't doing any extractions or any root canals or anything elaborate like that, but I was protecting some of these teeth to buy them a little bit of time until they could get home and get some needed care. So thanks for asking.
So thank you again. That was great, and thanks for wrapping that up. That was really really wonderful. Yeah, there's also little icons down at the bottom, reactions. You can applaud, I think, and I don't know what that goes in the chat or whatever. Oh, you can the bottom right of your screen, reactions. There you go. You can thumbs up, you can applaud, you can do all sorts of things. Next week, Michael Zimmerman's going to talk about someone who died and was mummified, and it wasn't discovered until 66 years later that it was an actual person. Everyone thought it was a mannequin, and then they realized it was a real person. And it's a bizarre kind of story. I'm not quite sure that I really understand it, but actually I'm sure that I really don't understand it. But he's got a great way of telling stories and teaching, and so I encourage everyone to join us next week. Bruce, thank you really so much again. I really appreciate it. I know you've got to teach in a little while, and so thank you for spending time with us this morning. And I look forward to hearing whatever else you do. You're welcome. If you do anything, within the next couple of weeks, we got plenty of time, plenty of Zoom.
I'll come back. If you'll invite me back, I'll come back.
Oh, you're invited. Thank you so much, Bruce. Really appreciate it. Thank you all for being part of it.
Thanks, everybody, for listening to me. I hope I didn't bore you to tears.
Oh, bye, everybody.
Take care.
Bye.
Thanks, Bruce. That was great.
It was wonderful.
Oh, you're all very welcome. I'm gonna sign off. I'm gonna grab a bite to eat. In about 8 minutes, I have to give an hour-and-a-half implant lecture. So the talking goes on. I've never been shy about talking.
Take care. Thanks again, Bruce. I'll be in touch.
All right, everybody.